Welcome. Thanks for coming. It seems when we're talking about workforce management, it seems appropriate that one of our panelists is stuck in traffic demonstrating one of today's workforce issues here in Washington. We're coming together at a time when the very nature of work is changing, and agencies and the military services are more dependent than ever on a high quality workforce. So the challenges really couldn't be greater. And I'd like to start there with each of you. Just tell us, what are the big challenges you're facing right now, and what are you doing to address them? You want to start?
Sure. So first, thanks for inviting me to be on the panel. So a little context for everyone in the room. So USDA's vision is to do right and feed everyone. And what that means for us is that we have 29 agencies and offices, 100,000 employees, and about 4,500 locations, both in the country or in the United States and abroad. And our employees are responsible for providing leadership on food, agriculture, rural development, natural resources management, nutrition, and we're dependent on our employees. At the end of the day, people drive the business of government. And so healthy organizations adapt. They ensure that their organizations have the right skills, they ensure that their organizations are the right sizes, but our current federal personnel system, it's based on legislation that's decades old. And when we say decades, that's an understatement, that it's legislation rooted in the 1800s, in 1923, and then the Civil Service Modernization Act of 1978. And over the years, we've seen special authorities, special regulations solve specific problems, but what it's also done is create a very complicated system. And so we have a complicated personnel system coupled with a high-paced, evolving mission delivery structure. So one of the ways that we're trying to evolve and adapt to this complexity is make use of data in a completely different way. I just joined USDA back in February, and when I started, one of the first things I wanted to know is, tell me about our attrition rate. Tell me about our attrition rate the last 5 years. How many HR specialists are leaving? How many IT specialists are leaving? Tell me about the agency attrition rates. And the only way we could do that when I first started was extensive data calls. What if I want to marry up attrition rates versus retention incentives and relocation incentives and recruitment incentives? Are we matching it up? What about our training dollars? How is this matching up with our attrition and the other data sources? And we didn't know the answers. What I'm happy to share today is that through investing in a data lake, through investing in dashboards, we've really unlocked our data. There's a lot of people data that's out there. The key is, how do you unlock it? And so not just in human capital related data, but across our CFO, our senior procurement executive, our chief operating officer, we know a lot more. And so we're able to let's look at the attrition rate. Let's look at what happened in the last couple of years. Let's talk about retirement eligibility. Are we actually seeing it? And not months, weeks to get the data call, at our fingertips. I bring up my computer, I go to our dashboarding, and if I say, I want to know what the attrition looks like for HR specialists this year, I can click a button, filter, and there it is. And so with this very complicated, high-paced, evolving mission that we're delivering all across the country and in locations across the world, one of the best ways we're finding to think about our workforce, to think about planning for the future, is leveraging the data that we had, but really unlocking it to its full potential.
Great. Colonel?
All right, thank you, sir, for inviting me. Very, very nice to meet you, Tom.
Nice to meet you.
And very happy to be here. So some of the same problems in the military. I'm in the HR space, so I deal primarily with military HR. And data and several other areas are big problems in the military as well. So we have about 1 million soldiers in the U.S. military, and they're tied into 3 different components: the reserve component, the National Guard, and the active duty. And between those 3 components, we have about 300 different personnel and pay systems. And that evolution has been about 35, 40, 50 years in the making. And part of that is because authorities are different between the components. And really our problem set is, hey, how do you understand the soldiers' talents in the military? How do you manage 1.1 million people when you have that many systems that are disparate, the data is fractured? How do you do that? So the Army's approach to this is, let's create something called the Integrated Personnel and Pay System Army. So you eliminate those systems, put all the data, centralize the data into one place, clean the data because it's not the best, tie down what's authoritative, and then you can really take a look at your workforce. So we say, hey, there's three main capabilities we're going to have with IPSE. And the first is total force, so put everybody into one system, so all 1.1 million soldiers into one system. Then you can see yourself well. Then we're going to switch or shift what we consider our current personnel processing or our personnel processes to more of a talent management system. So a lot of our personnel rules, regulations, things that we follow are really rooted in an industrial age system that was put in place after World War II. So how do you change from that system to more of a talent management system and understand your workforce? And the only way you can do that from our perspective is, hey, consolidate people into one system, build capability to take a look at talents. And I'll talk a little bit later about our 25-point profile, how we're trying to understand our talent. And then, change along the way, change as you get that consolidated and move forward. And then, of course, auditability. So pay is done not the best in the military. We have a lot of pay problems because of all those different systems. And we have lots of different reasons you're paid certain amounts in the military. You get paid deployment pay, but it's not the same everywhere. If you're in one country versus another country, there's different pays. There's special pays based on what skill set you have. How you manage all that right now is very much problematic for us. There's a complete air gap between the personnel system and then the pay system. So IPSE is meant to tie those together, and then you can become fully auditable as well. So data up front is a big thing. Changing our processes so we can understand holistic talent better is an issue that we're going to solve with this system. And then at the end of the day, also getting auditable.
So you're saying that the Army has a super simple personnel and pay system.
That's right. That's right.
How long, where are you at in the process of achieving an integrated system?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing it in chunks, in phases. We call them releases. So right now we're in our final testing for what we call our release 2, which will go to the National Guard first. So we're in our final testing up in Pennsylvania for our system, and then we'll roll out to all 54 states and territories this next year. And then in 20, we'll get all of the reserve and active component into the system, and then tie pay at the back end of 20 into the system. So we're really looking at, over the next several years, doing final testing and then implementing it, and then moving forward. But let me highlight. We all know in the military, change is hard, right? We're a very structured organization. We've been around for a long time, and culture and change is hard. So as we take a look at our current personnel processes and try and drive to a talent management process, the system will help us. The system will help us change, but changing culture is hard. And I'll use one example. In the military, we look at people very much through their military occupational specialties. So we call that MOS. If you're an infantryman, we code you as an 11 Alpha. That's what you are. You're an infantryman. And then you're at a certain rank, a lieutenant, a captain, a staff sergeant. We generally man the Army and utilize you in that with those two variables. So what specialty you are, and then what rank you are. So it's a bit limiting because we know that everybody has unique talents. An infantryman may be your best cyber guy because he does it on his own. Maybe he was a hacker in high school. Maybe he's a coder on his free time. But we don't really have a way of tracking that today. And our system, IPSE, is meant to track that, track your true skills, so then we can, as we move forward, maybe utilize you a little differently than the 11 series infantry captain that you are. For instance, my own personal experience, I did a fellowship at USDA for a year. I helped put together a training regimen with universities on agriculture that was used by military units during the civilian surge in Afghanistan in 2008. But the Army knows I was at USDA, but they don't know what I really did at USDA, or the contacts that I made at USDA, or my basic understanding of economic development or agriculture. So our system is meant to highlight that. So maybe my skills could be used in a different aspect than just HR. But today I'm really looked at as an HR guy, so I'm only going to fill HR jobs. So we have these big problems. We're trying to drive towards a big solution.
Great. Mary, you mentioned issues with the civilian personnel system, which everybody loves. Tell us more about the specific issues and limitations and how you work with that and around that.
Well, let's see. Okay. So one of the tenets of the president's management agenda is that we need a modern workforce that enables senior leaders and enables managers to get their work done. And so when we look at the personnel system, again, we're rooted in legislation in the 1800s, the Pendleton Act, 1923, the Classification Act, Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, so now 40 years later, and that is the foundation of our personnel system. So when we look at almost any aspects of the personnel system, the classification system, complicated classifiers that truly understand the system, there aren't a lot of them. And so, but nonetheless, on the civil service side, we are grounded in that classification system. The general schedule system, I think there was an article just this week about the general schedule system and how employees move up GS 1 through 15, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And employees, if they started at a step 1 for a particular GS level, 20 years we could be looking at for them to go up to a GS step 10. The hiring process is lengthy. And so we see in some cases talented job seekers taking jobs because the complexity and length and the rules surrounding the hiring process, we lose some of our top talent. And so when you talk about the need for civil service reform and when you look at the president's management agenda, I think what you're seeing reflected is that we are in a system that again, the Civil Service Act of 1978, 40 years ago, is what we're operating on. And all of the special legislation, special authorities, the pilot authorities, they've all, over the years, the intent is to solve specific problems, but it creates even more complexity because we still haven't changed the underlying system.
One of the dynamics that comes up a lot is if you ask agencies, they'll say, and managers, they'll say the limitations of the system make it very difficult for us to recruit and retain a workforce. And if you ask OPM, they'll say, oh, agencies have more flexibility than they think they do. Where do you come down on that?
So I think the answer to both of those is yes. and I say that with, there are flexibilities, but you have to know them all, and you have to feel comfortable with them all. And so over the years, the number of flexibilities, the demo authorities, the different pilots, maximizing the current system, that also adds complexity too. And so one of the things you hear across the Chief Human Capital Officer community is, yes, those flexibilities exist, but how do we make sure that all of our managers, all of our HR specialists fully understand them, how to apply them, when they're appropriate, and to do it in a legally compliant way?
because we are all operating from a set of laws and regulations, and so we need to have legal and compliant HR operations. And so the amount of knowledge that's required to navigate all of those different flexibilities, all of the different ways to make the system work more, while they may exist, it adds a lot of complexity. And in some human capital officers, you'll actually say they have too many authorities right now, that trying to navigate all of the things that you can do makes it challenging for the HR specialists, and it makes it challenging for the hiring managers too. Some hiring managers hire a lot of people every year. Some hiring managers hire a few. And so trying to make sure that both on the HR side and the hiring managers, that everyone understands the full suite of what you can do is a very complicated undertaking.
I wanted to ask each of you about recruiting specifically. First with you, Colonel, what are the current challenges now? Is the strong economy a hindrance to recruiting?
Yeah, and so I can talk a little bit about recruiting. It's not necessarily my specialty in the military, but obviously scale and size is always a problem. So numbers-wise, lots, thousands upon thousands of soldiers have to come in the Army every year, and part of I think our challenge is how do you fully understand the talents of folks that are coming into the Army? So our system as well, how we're trying to develop it is so you take some tests as you come in, and it gears where a soldier will serve, in what specialty. Are they going to be a mechanic? Are they going to be an infantryman? Are they going to be a pilot? Are they going to be a computer specialist? Are they going to be a cyber specialist? Part of our problem set is once we bring those soldiers on into the Army, how do you fully understand their specific skills beyond that initial specialty that we train them on and utilize them in? And again, where I'm at in the military is developing the system that will help pull that out from each of those soldiers, because we see that once you get them into the Army, there may be other options as folks go in their career along a path to either change their specialty or be utilized in different ways. So that's specifically where I'm focused on. But to get back to maybe your previous question too, I mean, we see that we have the flexibility in the Army to manage the folks that we have in the Army, but the system is the impediment right now. Those 200 systems, not fully understanding the talents of the workforce, that's the impediment. So changing the system, focusing on bringing everybody into that one system, developing what we call the 25-point talent profile, which will allow us to see the holistic talents of individuals. That's really the key for us, because if we can utilize people with what they're good at, what they're interested in, we think we can retain them longer in the military. And so multiple things going on there just with this one systems implementation, but we see that it as really the cornerstone of how we change our HR as we move forward.
You mentioned culture as being an issue, and I'm wondering about specifically with communication. Are you developing systems to ask soldiers where they want to go and how they might want to go on a different career path?
We absolutely are. We absolutely are. And so some of that happens today, but I would say it's on the fringes. So in the military, units have to be filled to the right requisite manning, because we tie that to what we call readiness. Every unit in the Army has to be ready to deploy at any given time. So those units have to be filled, so you can meet those readiness standards, so then you can deploy and do the mission that's assigned to us. So that's an overriding requirement for us. So sometimes, specifically over in the past 50 years, then your preference as to where you would want to go would take a secondary, backseat to that requirement, specifically in the middle of the war. But we feel that, hey, if you want to retain the very best that you have in the military, moving forward, changes in generation, we feel we have to pay a little more attention to your wants and your needs. So do you want to work in a certain period or a certain segment of society? Do you want to work in a certain region in the country? We think we have to understand that a heck of a lot better than what we do today, and then take that into consideration as we build readiness in units. So
Yeah.
it's a tough challenge, right, to balance both of those. But there's an overriding understanding that we have to take that into consideration more than we have in the past.
Yeah. Mary, you mentioned that some of your hiring managers do a lot of hiring and some not as much. Are there general recruiting challenges across the department that you're seeing right now?
I don't know that we could say there's general recruiting challenges. There's a diversity of mission and the skills that we're hiring for. So for 2019, I'm estimating that we're going to hire 8,000 permanent employees and another 15,000 seasonal employees. So when you think about wildland firefighters or forestry techs or folks that do research on crops, there's a seasonal element to that work. And so because of the diversity of the mission and the skill sets, I can't say that there's one kind of a one-size-fits-all challenge. We have scientists, we have the wildland firefighters, and the skill sets that we're looking for, what that work looks like is quite different from each other. Underpinning all of it, though, is we're trying to use data in a different way to think about what our hiring needs are across the occupations, looking at attrition, looking at retirement eligibility, and so marrying up whether we're hiring a PhD economist or whether we're hiring a entry-level food safety inspector. One of the commonalities, though, that type of work is quite different from each other, as we're looking at what do we know about what's happened in the last several years and what do we expect to happen in the future.
Great. Are there specific retention strategies that you're implementing once you get people hired and in the workforce?
Again, I think it's an occupation-specific strategy. We have some employees, I was looking at our retirement data, and we actually had a couple employees that retired in 2018 with 55 years of federal experience. And so for some of our pockets and mission areas, we have employees that stay well after their retirement eligibility, and then there's other occupations where they retire more quickly. And so given the diversity and the adaptability that we need in our workforce, I can't say that we think a one-size-fits-all strategy works. It really needs to be targeted based on the mission. We're spread out all over the country and even locations around the world, and so we have to be really thoughtful about how we marry up the specific workforce needs with those occupations and our retention approach.
We're excited with the system. So in the Army, as we tie HR and pay together, we're also implementing the use of personal mobile phones for self-service. So today, that doesn't exist in the Army. So you would do a personnel action or a absence request on a piece of paper, and you would send it through your HR folks, and you would get approved and et cetera. It's just a little messy. It's a little inefficient. It's a little messy. We think we have to solve that. We have to give more transparency to our soldiers through basic HR actions, through basic pay actions. And the system's going to help us do that. And putting self-service in the hands of a soldier in their mobile phone that they already have in their hands, we think is going to touch on retention over time. So if folks understand a little better of how they're being paid, the timeliness of their pay, the location of their HR actions, they have more opportunity to give preference and talk about their assignments. We think that will have an overarching impact on retention as we move forward in the Army. So we're pretty excited to get the system in the hands of the soldiers and our commanders and see where it goes.
Great. I think we have time for a couple of questions. If anyone has a question. Here's one's coming. Right up here, up front.
Just speak loudly.
It's never been a problem.
Yeah.
So with AI technology becoming so apparent nowadays, Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
With artificial intelligence becoming so prevalent and the bandwagon is certainly here in front of us, how are both your agencies embracing that? What are some of the ways that you might be considering using it, and in other capacities, what are some of your concerns?
I know, sorry.
So I think retooling and reskilling the workforce, that's one of the tenets in the President's Management Agenda. And I'd say that's something that agencies do all the time, even thinking about food safety, for example, and what our inspectors do. That evolves. Our CFO office has actually undertaken a robotics pilot, and what their goal is to eliminate the repetitive manual work to free up hours so that employees can actually spend time on more data analysis, do shift from the kind of low value, repetitive manual work, give them back hours in their day so that they can spend their time on data analysis and more of the high value work. And so that's an example right now that we are undertaking, and it is saving time, and it's shifting what employees can spend their time doing. And so I'm interested to see, we're in a pilot mode right now, so it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, but the initial indications is the pilot is doing what we thought it would do. And another area where we're looking at kind of reskilling our workforce is in IT modernization. As we think about taking a comprehensive approach to managing IT across USDA, we're looking at our IT workforce and how they support our IT systems and infrastructure.
It's a big, well, I guess you can hold that then, right? I think that's a big question, a very important question. For us, I think it's a phased approach. Up front, we're trying to consolidate all that data into a centralized location, and then hold the line, as we would say in the military, to authoritative data sources. So if we can clean the data, get the right data, that's a very logical next step. Because we think as you consolidate the data and then take a look at it in different ways, you're clearly going to drive to different policies. You're clearly going to do different things in the HR space. So we especially on the talent side, you'll be able to holistically see yourself much better. You'll understand the workforce that you have, and for us, it's the cornerstone of changing our whole HR processes in the Army. So we're on that path. We think it's going to be in phases, though, and it's going to take us a few years to get through it. But I for one is very, very excited about doing this because of what you'll be able to unlock here in the near future.
It's coming.
As you talked about self-service and cell phones, and you talked about people being able to process their own or not process their own personnel actions, but access their personnel files. Have you thought about the limitations that might be there? Because my agency has become a little more self-service oriented, and now I need a desktop scanner to process any personnel changes for myself. So have you thought about those kinds of limitations as you want to enable cell phone use for, I guess, personnel or tech, whatever reasons in the workplace?
Right, absolutely. We have, and there's a whole spectrum, right? There's security, there's limiting, PII and where that is in the system. Our approach is, PIIs would really not be on the cell phone for self-service. There's ways to work around that, with use of technology. Our baseline HR system is tied to PeopleSoft. This is a well-used system. It's used by many corporations, and there's lots of lessons learned that we're utilizing across the civilian space, but even in the government space as well. Lots of folks use PeopleSoft here. So, in the federal workforce, Coast Guard has done an implementation as well. So we're really basing where we're headed on some of those lessons learned, but we're already in the space of scanning documents now. So you do a paper form, you bring some supporting documents, you scan it, you send it on email, then you have to send it to where our repository is Of course, we have problems with auditability, right? What could go wrong in that scenario? We're going to try and get to the point where you can take pictures of your documents. You can upload them into the system. So then there's much more auditability end to end than where we're at today. And then it just goes back to the retention too. You know, we're in the military. You guys all know what our core mission is. We trust soldiers to go downrange and make life and death decisions, but then we don't really tell them where their personnel actions are. Right? That needs to change. That needs to change. We're on that path, and we think, you know, part of that is, hey, welcome to the 21st century. Everybody's on a mobile device. Every other company does this. We need to be there as well if you're going to retain talent moving into the future. Much more competitive world. We have to be just like the best businesses in America, and that's where we're headed in the Army.
So you're saying every soldier will be issued a scanner?
It's much more messy than that. Yes.
Mary, did you have anything to add on that?
I think as we think about systems and how we operate human capital, we're thinking about the same kinds of things. So how do we enable more manager self-service? How do we enable more employee self-service? How do we make sure that managers have the data that they need, that employees have the data that they need? How do we make it something like performance management? How do you think about making it, demystifying it and making it easier? Because the most important relationship is that relationship between the employees and supervisors is absolutely critical. So how do you think about performance management instead of this very complicated, the once a year progress review? How do you turn it into something that's iterative, that's happening all the time, where there's a meeting of the minds about what expectations are? And when you look at the private sector, you can see performance management on a mobile app. You could do performance management. I did my check-in with Sally today, and here's the things that we talked about it, and you could do it on your commute home. And Sally could look at it and say, yes, those are the things that we talked about. So as we think about our systems and our data, both the kind of back-end processing, but also the front end, how do we make it easier for managers and employees to do their jobs?
Great. Well, I think we've reached the end of our allotted time, but I wanted to thank both of you for coming and sharing your thoughts, and I look forward to having this conversation again in a year to see how much progress you've made. Thanks.
I appreciate it.